Alrighty then. Let's get this started. Hello and welcome to the Battle of Lissa, 1866. Now, this takes place 155 years ago today, and it's one of the most important battles of its age because it's kind of like the Falklands War. And what do I mean when I say kind of like the Falklands War? Well, the Falklands War is the most recent naval conflict fought. So whenever we are looking at current ship designs and we are looking at current ships, we tend to start referring back to the Falklands War. This is because that's the most recent experience of people actually having a near-peer engagement. And honestly, if we're being honest, thanks to the joys of geography, etc., pretty much it was a peer-on-peer engagement in many of the aspects of warfare. So, that is the joy of the Falklands War. That is also a reason the Battle of Lissa matters. And it has a huge impact, as we'll be getting into, on various things and tactics and doctrines for how warfare develops over the next time after this. Because basically it goes Battle of Lissa, then there aren't really many, how do I put this politely, many right humble battles that provide a good quality, theoretically, of a fleet action engagement until the Battle of Tsushima. There are engagements, they are interesting, and they have lessons which are learnt, but the Battle of Lissa shapes, arguably, the next 39 years. And as such, shapes the Battle of Tsushima, which in turn shapes the First World War, which in turn shapes World War II. So the Battle of Lissa is incredibly important. It's also a transitory battle. Yes, I saw this and thought I'd add it in. So, one of the things that's going to come up in this one, and the reason I've put this in here, is I'm going to be trying to pronounce Italian names. I have tried my best, and I will hopefully get them right. But if I don't, please take that not as me making a joke, but me being as serious as this otter's face is. Not like the hat is. But either way, it was a bit of fun. So, Battle of Lissa, 1866. And honestly, the first thing you learn whenever you do any research on the Battle of Lissa is that pretty much the Italian Navy should stay far away from Lissa. In fact, I have a vague recollection of there being a battle near the island of Lissa, or where is what we call now Lissa, in the Roman period between them and the Greeks, which didn't go to Romans' way as well. Although I cannot for the life of me remember which battle or when exactly, which example of the Greco-Roman wars that was. But I'm fairly sure there was one. There are two battles which, in the Common Era, which we are titled the Battle of Lissa. There's the 1811 one, where 3 British frigates and a post ship beat up a Franco-Italian force of 6 frigates, a brig, 2 schooners, a xebec, and 2 gunboats. And yes, that is right, that's a xebec. We can all be slightly absurd about that. But we are dealing with the 1866 one, the 155 years ago one. The one which is between an Austrian force of 4 ironclads, 3 armoured frigates, 1 ship of the line, 5 screw frigates, 1 screw corvette, 2 screw gunboats, 6 gunboats, 1 screw tender, and 3 steamships, versus an Italian force of 9 ironclads, 1 armoured frigate, 2 armoured corvettes, 7 screw frigates, 1 screw corvette, 2 paddle corvettes, 1 sloop, 3 gunboats, 2 avissons, and 4 merchantmen. I swear there are fleet actions in the First World War which have less complicated groupings of ships. I mean, I am absolutely impressed as anything with Tegerhoff and Di Pisano that they actually managed to get their fleets out there. Tegehoff does have an advantage. He does manage to have a slightly more homogeneous force, and also he has a far more homogeneous personnel fleet to organize. But the Pisano, honestly, he's got the bigger fleet, and it's just going to magnify his problems. And what it doesn't really admit there is that one of those ships is, I kid you not, a ram. Okay, we'll be getting into this later. But for all those who think that the ram is just something that's an American Civil War invention that no one actually really wants a ram, it's just the Confederates trying to get through the blockade and various people who say, no, the Italians actually deploy a ram. It's just as nutty as you can possibly imagine. What's even stranger is they don't actually do any of the ramming. They deploy the ram, and yet they don't do any of the ramming. None of it. So, the Battle of Lissa takes part as the part of the Third Italian War of Independence. And honestly, it depends who you are, what's going on. And I'm actually going to hide behind this and make this big screen so you can read the part of it. Victor Emmanuel II of Savoy was proclaimed King of Italy on the 17th of March, 1861. Prior to this, he'd been the King of Sardinia, Piedmont. Now, he doesn't get this by being nice at a national plebiscite. He gets this because Giuseppe Garibaldi is one of the better generals in the world at that time, and he manages to wipe out the army of the, well, how to put it, wipe out the armies he faces of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and so they take that over. But there's still huge chunks of Italy which aren't actually part of Italy in 1861. There is the whole Venetian era, as we're looking at now, and there is also much of Rome and, of course, the Papal States. Now, this meant that, in contrast to what you'll be seeing in, I don't know, World War I, when Germany gives Austria-Hungary a blank check, at this point, between Prussia and Austria, there is a huge discord going over the German question, as Prussia is seeking, rather like Sardinia Piedmont has, to unite Germany as one nation, the Prussian nation. Let's get this right, you know. The Prussians were not after in creating the huge German state because they believed in the love of Germany. They were creating basically the enhanced Prussian area. That was their view. It would be a Prussian German state. And it's the same with Italy. It is in very much Sardinia Piedmont dominated Italy. Now, the trouble is with this lovely idea is that the Italian government decides to sign a military alliance with Prussia, thanks to that well-known, brilliant strategist, Emperor Napoleon III of France. What's really fun is that Giuseppe Garibaldi, of course, the better general on the Italian side, had, of course, got rid of, not that long ago, the Bourbon kings of the Two Sicilies. The last Bourbon sort of monarch. Yeah. Bonaparte, descendant, lining up with them. This is all sounding very Napoleonic Wars-ish, but we'll get to the good stuff. The plan... Sorry. The plan was that the Italian armies, led by not Garibaldi, but another general, Alfonso Ferrero Lamora, who was far more distinguished and, no, actually, he hadn't won any more battles than Garibaldi, so no, not more distinguished, but far more distinguished in courtly appearance. Yes, distinguished, far more of the court's choice. Count de Cavour, especially, preferred him, but that's mainly because him and Garibaldi never got on. Neither of them liked each other. Anyway, the idea was that Italian armies would engage the Austrians on the southern front, and using their naval superiority, the Italians would threaten the Dalmatian coast and seize Trieste. Now, of course, that becomes a thing that eventually they get back after World War I. So, shows you how long it takes to get the full Italy. The plan doesn't really work. Let's see. For starters, you have amalgamated two armies together after one of them has been beaten. So basically, you've beaten a country up, beaten up its army, killed a lot of its people, and then you've gone, now we are one country and you will fight alongside us. Really? No one see the problem in this? No one? But it's for Italy! But no one, there hasn't been an Italy. There hasn't been an Italy. This is a new creation. It's 5 years old. Most of the senior officers have, but Italy has been around less time than they've had grandchildren. It's not something they're really committed to, and you go further down, it gets even more complicated. And then you have the trouble for the Navy, because you've had two navies which have been completely different logistics, completely different procurement patterns, completely different training patterns, completely different philosophies of operation, one French-inspired, one British-inspired, all sorts of issues. And you've pushed them together and told them they've got to work together. And you've intermixed officers who don't have a foggiest what's different on the ship they're on. Oh, and they hate each other. They absolutely despise each other. Okay. So, the war starts off. And let's be honest, it doesn't go that well. The Italians invade they declare war. The Germans declare war. Well, the Prussians declare war on the 16th of June. By attacking German states which have allied with Austria. 3 days later, that's the 19th of June, Italy declares war on Austria. And despite having known it was coming, they don't actually launch their military operations till the 23rd of June. Look, before anyone looks at me, starts thinking I'm being rude about the Italians here, read Giuseppe Garibaldi. He's basically saying they were insane and they must have found a very good lunch. That's his, whole thing for taking that time to actually get started. But the Italian forces are divided into two. Broadly speaking, actually three. There's a third army. There's Giuseppe Garibaldi's hunters, which we'll talk to later, and nothing else. And then there is Marmora's army, which is coming from Lombardy area, west of the Minocca River, heading towards the powerful Quadrilatero fortress of the Austrians. And another army under Enrico Cialdi is deployed to Romagna, that's south of the Po River, and aims towards Mantua and Rovigo. On the 24th of June, so that is the day after they have started military operations, 5 days after they've declared war. 9 days after the Prussians began operations and declared war, by literally invading. That was how the Prussians started the war, invading. And then saying, we're at war. Do you realise this? Our troops are advancing on you. There is the Battle of Custoza. And how do I put this politely? So, Lamora turns up with 84,000 troops. He's facing off against Archduke Albrecht, who has 74,000 troops. The Austrian army, Field Marshal Archduke Albrecht, is a very competent commander of the Austrian forces, and he has 3 primary corps under him and a reserve division and a cavalry division. And Lamora's army is divided into 2 corps, each made roughly of 4 divisions, and a cavalry division which spends most of its time hanging around Third Corps, which is Enrique Moreza de la Roca, the general in charge of that one. Know that name, he'll come back later. Anyway. Also along, for the fun, was Victor Emmanuel II as well. And everything you can imagine going wrong goes wrong. The Austrians have far more forces available than the Italians anticipate. They offer far more resistance than the Italians anticipate. And on the Austrian left, the Austrian cavalry managed to get through the Italian First Corps without orders. They attacked the First Corps and got through it without orders at 7 a.m. Basically, the Austrian cavalry go, there's an Italian corps in front of us, we'll take them out. And the attack cripples the Austrian cavalry, because of course it's unsupported, but it panics the Italians, because they haven't got Giuseppe Garibaldi or anyone like that long who's going to keep the troops' morale up. They've got a lot of very highly esteemed officers, none of whom actually probably can tell how. And that's the other thing, you have very strong regional dialects. There isn't really an Italian, as we would say today, and a lot of soldiers can't, and officers aren't really speaking the same language. Well, they're not speaking in a similar enough way that they're understandable at points. So the Italian rear gets panicked, and 3 Italian divisions are immobilized. For the rest of the battle, do nothing. They literally just sit there cowering. Well, their generals are cowering. The troops are going, why are we sitting here? Then various isolated fights start to break out in Olsini, San Rocco, Custoza, and San Giorgio between the 5th Corps and Durando's 1st Corps. So they are having fun. And eventually it's sheer weight of artillery. And the Austrians the Italians keep trying to attack and keep thinking they're going to win and keep thinking the Austrians are out of sport, are going to be out of it. And no, Albrecht is harnessing, is very much controlling his force. And then when it gets to the point that the Italians are really spent, he sends in 5th Corps, his General Gabriel Ferrer von Roderick. a crack corps in many ways. And so at 1 p.m., it's the Lamora fort had decided the battle was lost and starts to order a retreat because they were losing. He felt they were losing, but he hadn't really lost because one of his divisions had actually managed to beat back 7th Corps, which was the weaker Austrian force, and captured something called Belvedere Hill. But Roderick is sent in by Albrecht, and Lamora is already withdrawing his forces, so I always find land battles very, very messy, considering they're on land, and there is theoretically there's always the thing that land battles are more chivalrous. Is always the perception than sea battles, because sea battles you're just blasting away with artillery. There is not really much room for chivalry in that until the fighting's over. In land battles, you can theoretically be chivalrous, you can stop, you can talk, and all these things. It really doesn't happen in this one. And yeah, the end of the battle, the Austrians have had 960 killed, the Italians 720. The Austrians have had 3,690 wounded. The Italians 3,112 wounded. The Austrians 1,000 captured. The Italians 4,315 captured. Also 6 guns, 6 big artillery guns. So really the casualties tell you that the fighting was mixed, that the Italians did do amazingly well considering their difficulties, their structural differences, their command difficulties. But in the end, they suffer 2,500 more casualties than the Austrians, and they're the ones who concede the field. And that takes place on the 24th of June, 1866. And not much happens. There is a lot of posturing, there is a lot of maneuvering, but not much else happens until we get to the Battle of Lissa, which takes place on the 20th of July. And as you can see, it is not quite, but very close to dead in the middle of the Adriatic Sea on the Dalmatian coast. It is a critical space to control. You control the Isle of Lissa, you control coastal movement, and you can put up an effective blockade of the Adriatic, and you can keep the Austro-Hungarian forces trapped in there. Which is really a very good thing to do, a very good strategy. Trouble is, as always the case, implementing strategy. So here are the commanders you have, and you have both the hero and the scapegoat. Now, this is of course the lovely image of Tegetthoff commanding his fleet while they charge in and ram the enemy ship. That's what it's supposed to be. I'm not sure why people have their swords out. Perhaps they thought there was going to be a boarding action. Perhaps that's just what you do. But it's a very idealized picture. This is more realistic of Tegetthoff, and this is more realistic of Carlo Pellino de Pisano. Now, Wilhelm von Tegetthoff is an interesting officer in terms of his background. He'd fought in the Second Schleswig War at the Battle of Heligoland, and the Austro-Prussian War, of course, he fights as in the Battle of Lissa. That's the thing, they include it in the Austro-Prussian War. Not the Italian War, it's Austro-Prussian War it's considered part of. And it's the second. It's also known as the 7 Weeks' War against Italy. What Tegetthoff realizes is that the Italian fleet might be larger, but it's not as coordinated. It's disparate. And in many ways, Persano has a trouble in that he's his own deputy. He has to run around organizing everyone. He can't really trust anyone and can't really trust any delegation because there's so much arguing and infighting. And he has sent huge amounts of letters to the Senate, I'm not sure, the Italian Senate, and to anyone in government he can, saying how badly organized this fleet is, how he needs time to bring it into a unified force, how it's really problematic. And here is the thing. He's from Piedmont. He joins the Sardinian Navy, and he commands the fleet 1860 to 1861. He sees action during the Second War of Italian Unification. After that war, he's elected to the legislature, becomes Minister of Marine in 1862, and in 1865 has been nominated senator. So he's been away from the Navy. Really hasn't had much involved in it for 4 years. He is appointed to command the Italian fleet pretty much without asking for it. He gives warnings about his ships, he gives warnings about the quality of his men, he gives warnings about the trouble he's got within his internal forces, and he needs to train them up. But they keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and the land war isn't going well. The land war is really not going well, and the Navy is seen as their advantage against the Austrians. The Navy is their chance to really win. The land war's not going to work. And he sets sail. I will say that after the Battle of Lissa, he is judged by the Italian Senate and condemned for incompetence and cashiered from duty, and dies apparently in disgrace in Turin in 1883. And he doesn't deserve any of that. I do not consider him, he's not Tegetthoff, he's not as good an admiral as Tegetthoff, but he is certainly not as bad admiral as he's made out to be, and he certainly doesn't deserve the treatment he is given, because he's given a very, very rum deal. Honestly, they're basically expecting him to pull off an Admiral Duncan at the Battle of Camperdown. And remember, Duncan's fleet had been in open rebellion almost at one point. There'd been mutinies. He has to hold people, physically holds them over the side, because he's a giant of a man, Duncan, and goes, "Are you going to fight me for control? Are you going to dispute my control of the fleet?" And Duncan could do that in that time. Camperdown, though, is a long time ago compared to this period, compared to the Battle of Lissa. There is only so much that Persano can do to try and get at control. And he does everything he can. But again, he's another officer chosen in many respects because he's an acceptable face rather than an exceptional officer. And anything less than an exceptional officer would not be able to hold these formations together, these forces together. It would take a lot longer to get them to work together. In contrast, Tegetthoff he has been with this force his whole career. He knows them like the back of his hand. He knows every officer. He knows every commander, every captain. He knows them all. He's worked with them all to some extent or another. He knows his force. He knows his personnel. He knows who he's commanding. And They know who they're serving. They trust him. They have absolute faith in him. Also, at no point does he change ship in the middle of a battle or just prior to the battle. We'll get into that. So, the Italian fleet. And I promised to tell you a ram, and there it is, the Affondente. Now, a fondatore, which apparently is literally Italian for sinker. Yes, they had a ram ship. Yes. It is ordered from the British shipyard Mayor of Millwall in London. They decide they want a steam ram. Eventually, because of financial problems, it's transferred from Mayor to Harrison's, also of Millwall. That's the time when Britain had a lot of shipyards. Originally, the Italian naval officer in charge of its construction, Simone Antonio Saint-Bon, had intended the ship to be unarmed entirely. But thankfully, and an unnamed engineer at Harrison decided that she should actually be armed. Now, a quick glance through this shows you how big a randomness you have going on. You have Re d'Italia, you have Redigio Portogallo, their sister ships, and then you have Regina Maria Pia, which is another ship, and then San Martino and Confsado, who are sisters of her, and then Anacona, who's also technically a sister of Regina Maria Pia, but a bit different, and again, and then Principe de Carano, and everything's slightly different. And they are all slightly strange. Now, the Austro-Hungarian fleet are no less strange, but slightly more homogeneous in terms of their organization. Now, they were commanded from the Erzog Ferdinand Marx, which you can see pictured there in 1880. Which was considered a second-class armoured frigate, launched in 1865, so only a year old, 5,000 odd tons with 1648-pounder guns, 4 8-pounder guns, 2 3-pounders, and nice 123mm iron belt. Before you ask, yes, she's a broadside armoured frigate. Interesting thing, of course, is the ram had also been launched in 1865 and completed, well, technically ended service apparently incomplete on the 20th of June 1866. Just what you need to taking an incomplete ship with you. Okay. As he has just so much more for us on front. It's one of those things. Just quick explain. What I do is I have my notes, bullet points up in front of me next to me, and sometimes I write those and write sections of them weeks before I do the recording. And sometimes, therefore, I literally do remember how bad it was when I'm doing the recording, or in this case, hopefully the first and only recording. You'll learn more if you listen to Bill Trumps on that front. So the Battle of Lissa itself. Now, in the Austrian fleet, there was apparently enthusiasm, but also fear, because the Italian fleet was bigger. This is a quote. Which has been going around. And it's a quote from Giacomo Scotti's Lissa 1866. Now, I'm not sure why they would probably write it as that, but they also, and this is the thing with this quote, this is why it makes it interesting, is when they start, this is the period when they start to include numbers of guns in their writing of things. The Italian fleet was bigger, 12 ironclads and 19 wooden ships with 641 guns, while the Austrians only had 7 ironclads and 20 wooden ships with 532 guns. And apparently the Albanian, and one of the things he goes on to say is, it's curious that the Albanian ships with their 398 guns, though ordered by Persano to do so, did not fire a single shot all through the battle. We'll get into that. There are so much fun things going on here. Okay. Having ignored warnings from his pickets, this is one of the accusations made about Persano, but honestly, the warnings from the pickets, when I looked on, you've got a lot of problems with quality and training of men and your crews and ships, and you might not be 100% trustful of all the information they're giving in. If they're giving you a vague warning and you're already not trustful of the information, how much are you likely to believe it? So Persano doesn't believe that the Austrians are coming. After all, he has a big enough force. He's hoping to deter them with just size. And this allows the Austrians to get there while he's still forming up his fleet. So you see this one now, he is, in a way, in line of battle, ready. And the Austrians are organized in an arrow formation. I think that's a highly artistic rendering, but it's the best I could find. Now, there's a very nice gap appears between 1st and 2nd divisions. And Tegetthoff, which you can see on this map, Tegetthoff manages to force his fleet into it. Now, the reason the gap appears is because whilst he had been aboard Ria d'Italia prior that morning, Persano had moved to Affondatore. Sorry. And he hadn't really told the rest of his ships where he was going, or rather they hadn't picked up the information. So his ships were still looking to Re d'Italia, which had to stop to let the boat go off for him to get onto Affondatore. And he was now on Affondatore, but no one was looking at Affondatore for constructions because he'd gone from a frigate to a ram. Now, not necessarily a bad choice, but considering what happens to his flagship. Now, there's an interesting thing where people write up and go, this is one of the first battles where the T's crossed. It's not called crossing the T when you break the line, because you're crossing the T both ways. It's called breaking the line. So, it's called crossing the T if the enemy fleet's here and you go this way. But if you do this, you're breaking the line. So, Tegetthoff breaks the line. He basically pulls a Nelson. Column, break line. Woohoo! We've broken through the enemy. And this allows him to fire heavyweight fire at whichever ships he fancies. But more importantly, the thing is, he's concentrating on raking the ships and doing a lot of damage to them. And it's a lot of forward fire going into the enemy fleet at this point. Going to have an impact later, but please listen to why I'm emphasizing forward fire. It's going to come up. Whilst the Austrians were approaching, Vacca's 1st Italian Division managed to throw their guns at the Austrians. And the Austrians are limited to firing with their forward-firing guns. But Pisano, as said, is in the process of transferring flag as literally the enemy are bearing down on him. I never said he was I said he was given a rum deal. I never said he wasn't exactly not the best admiral as well sometimes. And as such, no general orders given, because again, he hasn't been able to trust deputies or tell anyone what he's doing, so no one's presenting for a general. So the 2nd and 3rd divisions, in the opposite motif than the Austrian cavalry at the earlier land battle, don't fire. So the Austrians cross what's the killing area, you could think of it, with no ships lost and only Drake is hit by 17 times by heavy shells. Temporary loses propulsion, loses the main mast, but Heinrich von Moll, her captain, is decapitated. And Karl Wefrecht, the ship's commander and his second in command, managed to bring the ship back into the fight and keep on going. And as said, the Austrians break the line. And because things were going badly at this point, once he's managed to get on his ram, Persano decides to use the ship he's on to ram the unarmoured screw battleship, the Kaiser, rather than one of the armoured ships engaged with the Italian 2nd Division much nearer to him. Rather than going after the big, heavy enemies, he's going after the unarmoured, converted ship of the line. And here's the great fun. This is the one thing you ask for a ram, is it's got to be fast manoeuvrable. Even with the captain of the Re de Portugalia, one of those frigates, the sister of the Re d'Italia, providing fire support on at the Kaiser with rifled guns, so not firing on the heavier Austrian units, but concentrating on this Kaiser to back up Toscana. The Kaiser manages to dodge the Affondatore. And while that von Petz, in fact, even counter-rams it to an extent. He dodges and counter-rams it. So the impact tears off the Kaiser's stem and bowsprit and leaves her figurehead embedded on the Re de Portugalia. But, yeah. That she doesn't get sunk. She's still afloat. The Kaiser is still there. And Teganov decides to throw his flagship, the Erzog Ferdinand Max, captained by Maximilian Dobreski von Steneck, first at Re d'Italia, and then at Palestra. Both cases, he scores glancing blows, but he comes back. And he managed to sink the Re d'Italia. And this is where you get a real example of what's the problems are with the Italian fleet, because the captain of the Italian ship makes a decision to reverse in order to avoid crossing the Austrians' bows at the crucial moment so that he won't get hit. But instead, the Italia gets holed hard and gets a 5.5 meter hole below her waterline. She strikes her colours, sinks in 2 minutes. And there's even a legend that the captain shot himself after giving the order to strike the colours. What's the point? You're going down. But more importantly, you're the captain. Your job is to try and get your crew off at that point. There's really no point in striking your colours. You're going down. There's a whole level of effort going on there, apparently, which is far too much effort for what the scenario is. You've got a huge hole. You're taking in water. You're going down. There are times which you worry about these things, and there are times you don't. At this point, as the Urzan Ferdinand Max lips away, after conducting 3 ramming attacks, one of which successfully sunk the enemy, and Anacona closed on her, attempting to ram. They didn't, but they managed to get a full broadside off at point-blank range. However, they forgot to load the shot. There is the SMS Kaiser. The Affondatore gets close to it a couple of other times, and every time it survives. And actually, in the end, Pisano orders them away. Teganov's victory is saluted by his sailors, who are mainly Croats, Venetians, and all sorts of things, with the Venetian cry, a traditional Venetian cry of victory, Viva San Marco. Again, things aren't necessarily as simple or as straightforward as you might think, because whilst there are sections of Venice and Venetian territories which certainly wished to unite with Italy, there were large sections which were quite happy being Austrian, especially when they were winning. This is the Italian fleet when they get back into harbour. The Italians lose 2 ironclads. As a result of the battle, and you can almost argue other ships as well after the battle are sort of, how do I put this, are damaged enough that they're not much use. For the Austrians, it's a big thing. They've won the battle. So far, they are winning this war. This is not so. They are suffering versus the Prussians. They certainly are, but they are winning versus the Italians, and their navy is holding up brilliantly. On the 21st of July, thankfully for the Italians, they do get a victory, but even this is a victory which is taken from the jaws of defeat. This is the Battle of Bezzecca. Now, Garibaldi has reformed his hunters of the Alps, his critical troops. And they really are very, very skilled and very good troops. And that's a good thing they are, because they pull him out of the fire. He invades Trentino as part of the general Italian offensive. And that takes place after the Battle of Königgrätz. This result of this actually also leads to the Austrians withdrawing some troops to protect Vienna. However, Franz Kuhn von Kuhnfeld, the general major in charge of the Austrian forces, decides to counterattack and manages to occupy the city of Bezzecca. Garibaldi basically just goes, "Retake the town!" And it falls apart, because that's literally the level of staff work they do. I don't know why. Garibaldi tends to be far more efficient than that, but no, in this time he just believed his own image or something. Anyway, might have been because he was moving around the battlefield in a coach because of a wound from a previous encounter, and was slightly in danger of being captured at a few points. Possibly. Who knows? Anyway. The Italian artillery managed to get a hill close to the town. And they cover the infantry assaulting which assaults the town and cause the Austrians to withdraw to their emplacements in the surrounding mountains. It's enough of a battle that it gives something for the Italians to claim. But there is a reason that on the 9th of August, when he receives a message of armistice from General Lamora and the orders to abandon Trentino, Giuseppe Garibaldi replies with a telegram, "I obey." But it's kind of like, I obey, but I don't wish I had to obey. The whole war is really kind of mucked up. Wars tend to be fairly mucked up, I do admit, but this one's mucked up by even by most war standards. The Battle of Bezica it's between 10,000 Italians and 15,500 Austrians. And the Italians suffer 25 killed or missing, 82 wounded and 100 captured. And the Austrians suffer 121 killed or missing, 451 wounded, and 1,070 captured. And it's all thanks more to the hunters of the Alps and the fact that they will follow Giuseppe Garibaldi anywhere than any general or any strategy. And thanks to that, the war isn't too bad for the Austrians. And the Italians do okay out of it. They do get the Venetia area back. But consequences of the battle, these are from naval perspective. Well, the ram becomes very popular and stays there. Just see this lovely example of it. But also notice that there are lots of guns firing forward. It's a big thing. Suddenly becomes having guns able to fire forward. And this is a thing which actually does push towards the turret adoption and turrets being used, because if you want to be able to fire forward or fire at the fleet which you might be bare and you're trying to cross the T of, you need to be able to change your guns at different angles. There are angles your broadsides will not reach. Now, what impact does this have on the Dreadnought? Because there are people going to be saying that go, but they have a bulbous bow, not a ram bow, so that means, they're not for ramming. Although famously she, of course, does sink a submarine by ramming. Well, those wing turrets, which I absolutely despise. Wing turrets, which I have spent hours, probably, in lectures and various videos pointing out the problems and the issues with wing turrets. Well, the Battle of Lissa is the whole reason that wing turrets exist, in my opinion. I think otherwise they might have died earlier on. The idea you needed to have the maximum firepower forward until you could figure out super firing and get super firing turrets and work out the balancing of the hull and the strength of the hull to put that in. Wing turrets were the way you got maximum guns to bear forward. And let's consider this from the perspective with the Dreadnought. She has a broadside of 8 guns. She has a forward fire or an aft fire of 6 guns. So she has a 75% of her broadside she can also fire forward or aft. That's a good ratio. That would mean, theoretically you can say, that at no point is she able to bring less than 75% of her firepower to bear on any target. Now, the reality someone's going to point out to me is that if they're off at if they're off at the forward angle up there or down there, that becomes slightly more difficult. And I would agree with you. it's a theory. It's not a reality. In reality, there are plenty of times when probably she'll be able to maximum get 4 guns to bear in certain quadrants, forward and aft. But for a good chunk of the time, 6 guns, and for a large amount of the time, 8 guns. Again, it's all down to this battle, where they managed to break the enemy line, and where they spent most of their time in a melee trying to ram each other, because apparently the guns weren't working. My view would be probably the guns weren't hitting anything, especially if you consider they... I have to say, I went and checked sources 3 times about that. The idea of firing your guns and not having loaded the shot. I can imagine an individual gun having done a mistake, but an entire broadside, that's just poor training. So what have we got coming? Well, today, of course, we had the Battle of Lissa. We are going to have a change of plans for the week of the 10th of August. But I will explain that later on in the live on the 22nd. And I hope otherwise it's going to be as is shown here. We've got a whole load of Patreon-inspired long patrols on Churchill's initiatives in World War I and World War II. And we have coastal defense ships, theory, design, and operational differences between navies on the 22nd of July. And we currently should have today, the vote should have gone live for the patron choice. So, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. And I hope you found the Battle of Lissa as interesting as I have. I have to say, its consequences are long-reaching for what it does. It's a mixed-up battle in a mixed-up war. It really is. And it's not really a fair battle in that this is not even the French Navy of the later Napoleonic Wars. We're talking about a navy which is 5 years old and is trying to organize itself. Yes, it's got some new ships, but it's also got a lot of old ships, and it's got a lot of old officers and a lot of old crew it's trying to organize. And I have undoubted sympathy for Carlo Paolino de Pisano, but I also don't think... I think the trouble is he has a lot of smart ideas. If you consider ramming is going to be the critical thing, then it would make sense that the Admiral should be in the ram, because that's the most critical weapon, and that's his Sunday punch. But then he should have moved to that earlier and should have made a lot of clear signals. He has a lot of Beattyisms going on before Beatty. And Tegetthoff, he's a Jellicoe. He is cool, calm, collected, and in charge. Definitely. This battle, not this one. So, that was the Battle of Lissa, 1866, and I'm going to end this before it gets to the full hour. I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope you want to watch some more. So please subscribe and like the video if you don't like it.